Well, Donald Trump is demanding something he has never seen. Donald Trump is demanding something no president in his lifetime has ever achieved: unconditional surrender. On Friday morning at 8:50 a.m., Donald Trump demanded Iran's unconditional surrender in a social media post. The last time the United States of America accepted an unconditional surrender, it took an atomic bomb to get it. In fact, two of them. After President Harry Truman became the first and only person in world history to use nuclear weapons against Japan, first in Hiroshima and 3 days later in Nagasaki, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender. Harry Truman had already accepted Germany's unconditional surrender in World War II 3 months earlier. No American president has demanded or accepted an unconditional surrender at the end of an American war since the year before Donald Trump was born, 81 years ago, at the end of World War II. Anyone who has witnessed a war during Donald Trump's lifetime knows that the unconditional surrender of Iran is impossible. Everyone on Wall Street knew that over the weekend when markets began to adjust negatively to an anticipated long-term Trump war in pursuit of the impossible: unconditional surrender. And so, of course, oil prices skyrocketed, the stock market crashed, and Donald Trump today offered his unconditional surrender. Donald Trump is the first American wartime president ruled by the stock market and the oil market. In a phone call with the CBS News reporter today, Donald Trump said, "I think the war is very complete." He said that during stock market trading in the hope of preventing a collapse. Donald Trump didn't mention unconditional surrender again today. And because it was Donald Trump who said unconditional surrender on Friday morning, we knew there was no chance of even Donald Trump holding on to the nonsensical demand of unconditional surrender. When President Franklin Delano Roosevelt announced publicly during World War II that the only peace terms that the United States of America would accept from Germany and Japan was unconditional surrender, the world knew that Franklin Roosevelt meant those two words, and everyone in the world, other than the German and Japanese regimes, knew that they could trust those presidential words as fact, as a prediction of what exactly was going to happen. The world knew from that moment on how World War II was going to end. They didn't know how long it was going to last, but they knew World War II was going to end in unconditional surrender because the President of the United States said so. And now the world knows the words of the current President of the United States have no meaning at all. 31 hours after Donald Trump demanded unconditional surrender, in another social media post, Donald Trump said, "We've already won!" exclamation point. Donald Trump doesn't even pay attention to the words of Donald Trump. Unconditional surrender Friday morning. We've already won Saturday afternoon. No unconditional surrender. As oil prices were skyrocketing over the weekend, Donald Trump said that higher oil prices were, quote, "a very small price to pay for USA." Well, it is certainly a smaller price to pay than the lives of the members of the American military that have been lost in Donald Trump's first days of Donald Trump's war. Donald Trump made no attempt to look presidential, since he doesn't actually know what that looks like, when he attended the dignified transfer of the bodies of the first 6 soldiers killed in his war. And he didn't remember those soldiers the next day when he wrote about what he called, quote, "a very small price to pay for USA." Before stepping up to the microphone at his golf resort today, Donald Trump made phone calls to individual members of the media in a desperate attempt to communicate something positive to the stock market, the real bosses of Donald Trump's war. One of those calls was to Fox's Brian Kilmeade, who quoted Donald Trump on Fox and Friends this morning, telling him, quote, "These ships should go through the Strait of Hormuz and show some guts. There's nothing to be afraid of. Show some guts." 20% of the world's oil shipments pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which has now become far too dangerous for safe passage. Shipping traffic has dropped by at least 90% in the strait or more. And Donald Trump's solution to that is for everyone on those oil tankers to just be brave, like him. Donald Trump wants the captains and crews of those ships to be brave and put themselves in the line of fire, put themselves in harm's way. Just call their families at home around the world and tell them, "Wish me luck. We are bravely going through the strait today because Donald Trump told us to show some guts." Donald Trump wants the non-combatants on commercial vessels to do something that no one in the Trump clan has ever done: enter a war zone. Show some guts. How about 19-year-old Barron Trump, who is turning 20 in 11 days? As I reported on this program last week, all four of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's sons served in the military in World War II, while their father served as commander-in-chief until his death in office weeks before Germany's unconditional surrender. There was nothing more loathsome in the United States during World War II than war profiteering. Harry Truman became president of the United States because of his crusade against war profiteering. Senator Harry Truman studied war contracts more than any other senator, searching for illegitimate profiteering. He eventually became the chairman of a special Senate committee to investigate war profiteering. Senator Truman's investigations were at first a minor irritant to President Franklin Roosevelt, who was worried about anything that might inhibit America's industrial giants like the auto industry, which was then converting their factories for the manufacture of aircraft and tanks. But soon President Roosevelt came to appreciate Senator Truman's policing of the war contracts and Senator Truman's condemnations of any war profiteers that his investigations exposed. Imagine Donald Trump appreciating congressional investigations of potential corruption in the war contracts that he awards, he personally awards, he personally interferes with and delivers to the companies he wants to deliver those awards to. Franklin Roosevelt actually appreciated Harry Truman's investigations and condemnations of war profiteering so much that President Roosevelt chose Harry Truman to run with him as his vice presidential nominee as President Roosevelt ran for his final re-election campaign during World War II. Harry Truman then became president after President Roosevelt died in office. Harry Truman would hate what the Wall Street Journal is now reporting about Donald Trump and his sons. The Wall Street Journal reports Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr., the president's sons, are backing a new drone company that is vying to meet fresh demand from the Pentagon and fill a hole left by the administration's ban on new Chinese drones in the U.S. Power Us, a drone roll-up company based in West Palm Beach, Florida, is merging with a publicly traded golf course holding company backed by the Trumps. Power Us executives said investors in the deal include one of the Trumps' investment vehicles, American Ventures, and Unusual Machines, a drone components company where Donald Trump Jr. is a shareholder and advisory board member. The deal brings deeper involvement by the Trump family into a multi-billion-dollar sector that has new opportunities for growth following changes imposed by the Trump administration. Those include the Pentagon's emphasis on large-scale, rapid adoption of small drones. When Donald Trump started his war, he called it a war. He called it a war multiple times, and that is what it is. Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense also called it a war when the war began, which he especially loved doing since he falsely calls himself the Secretary of War. But now that Donald Trump realizes that Americans don't like war, and maybe being reminded that he campaigned against war when he was running for president, Donald Trump is twisting the language to avoid the word war.
I mean, this was an excursion that a lot of people wouldn't have done.
An excursion. That's his latest description of his war today. An excursion. Donald Trump finds new ways to dishonor the war dead. A silly hat, and now an excursion. It's one thing to die in a war whose objective the president cannot explain. Americans have done that before and have done it since Vietnam. But to die in an excursion, to call it an excursion, before the families have even had the funerals, to struggle to find language that demeans those soldiers' sacrifice in service to his desperate political needs is a uniquely Trumpian moment in the American presidency. Tonight, there was another dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base for Army Sergeant Benjamin Pennington, 26 years old, of Glendale, Kentucky. Donald Trump wasn't there. Donald Trump did not attend. But he did attend a fundraiser for House Speaker Mike Johnson today in Florida at Donald Trump's golf resort there. And if you're paging through the history books trying to find the president who went to a political fundraiser at a golf club on the 10th day of a war, you can stop right now. Only the guy who said, show some guts, there's nothing to be afraid of, would show his guts by going to a fundraiser instead of the second dignified transfer of his war of choosing.